of port terminals in the region. There are quite a few people so into. Okay, we are running quite a bit late, so I think I'll just go. Okay, so my role this afternoon is to just give a general overview of the topic of the session, which is to position Africa as a major maritime center, which is the vision of various administrations across Africa. And the one aspect that we specifically deal with, zooming in, is seafarer development in Africa. In standing here, I'm wearing two hats. The first one for me, that is at the crux of who I am, is as a seafarer, and hence this topic is very important for me. I'm a sailor, I'm a seafarer, I'm a navigation officer, so this is very important for me. And the second hat that I'm also wearing is that of an African. Yes, I'm South African in South Africa, but we are at a conference for Africa. So I want to invite you as attendees of this conference and also as our speakers that we keep reminding ourselves as we process information, as we consider the topic at hand, that this is about Africa. Okay, let's try and wear our African hats. The topic is positioning Africa as a major maritime center. And in that, you hear it's a singular center. Okay, let that sink in just for a moment.
She's cheated about that sugar.
So what is this International Maritime Center? What is a maritime center? I know there's a lot of information going around, and just maybe to narrow it and to focus of the words in trying to define a major maritime center is encompassing connectivity, innovation, talent, with various
Yes, yes. What up, Maverick?
Yeah.
Did you get any seizures anytime soon?
What?
Did you get a seizure anytime soon?
No, like that.
Yeah.
That's me.
Minimum. Online only, but minimum person one time.
Somebody chill, bro.
Very short. In the States, most time. Shooting for vaccine. So where is the States, my boy?
The artist band is a real band, man.
Not really. I'll just go ahead and
And then,
most of them don't. You buy expensive stuff on credit. And
yeah,
you want to pay with something around.
vibes. That's the budget vibes. Vibes.
So you use the coastline to hold you over. That's a challenge. I don't know about international artists. Maybe they do that.
Might be different. Who is shooting up?
I'm not discriminating against anybody or any area of the sector. Then in terms of the second problem statement, there appears to be a shortage globally of seafarers, not just because of the geopolitics, but consistently over a number of years, seafaring has become less and less of an attractive career option. With technology improving, people want to be at home, they want to be on social media. So the challenge is, how do you make this industry attractive again? And especially for our African child to want to go to sea and fill the gaps in terms of the numbers. And the third one that I touch on is demographics. Africa has a very youthful population. Within the next 20 to 30 years, we could be exceeding our population numbers of our partner countries, even in BRICS. And within that possibly also lies opportunities. So the challenge for us is, what is the decision that we're going to make as Africa? You know, what are we going to decide to do? Are we going to look at becoming a major maritime center? Will we be able to put our differences aside, our diversity aside, our issues aside, as neighbors, as a continent, and say, hey, there's an opportunity, let's work together, let's cross over, collaborate, integrate together. When global shipping comes calling, are they going to find one center, or are they going to find amongst ourselves fighting about territory of who's going to be this maritime center? Are we going to put together our resources? Are we going to say, as we mentioned earlier, I want to do my own thing here in the north, in the east, in the south, in the west? And that is basically the challenge that Africa has. There are examples of where IMCs have worked. Singapore, EMSTA, there are collaborative efforts amongst countries and neighbors. I think so. I leave you with that. We really need to look at ourselves intrinsically. We need to look at our quality assurance around aspects of our whitelist status in Africa. The battles our countries have of staying on the whitelist, and how we're going to sort that out so that there's no question about the seafarer coming out of Africa. I thank you. And now introducing Professor Takeshi Nakazawa. Professor Nakazawa is currently the Executive Director of the International Association of Maritime Universities, IAMO. He's also a professor at the World Maritime University on a part-time basis in Sweden. He is a marine engineer by professor, having served at sea and graduated in the marine engineering department at Kobe University of Mercantile Marine in 1980. He then worked at the Institute of Sea Training of the Ministry of Transport in Japan. And after serving 7 years at sea as an instructor and marine engineer on board training ships, he returned back to university and decided to pursue a PhD. His research interests are in the fields of maritime technology and maritime education and training. In particular, what is very significant of IAMO and the collaborations with Africa, there are two that really stand out. In 2022, IAMO and SAIMI, our very own South African Institute of South African International Maritime Institute, concluded an MOU for future collaboration on maritime education and training, as well as research. And prior to that, a similar MOU was concluded between IAMO and the Kenyan Maritime Authority. Please Join me in putting our hands together for Professor Nakazawa.
Good afternoon. I know that the first presentation after the lunch is a little difficult because I need to keep it I need to keep attracting you, otherwise you will mean that my presentation will be your lullaby. I don't like to do this. Anyway, excuse me. The topic you can see in my back, the international best practice for seafarers training to enhance employability. This topic is actually given by the conference organizer this time, just a couple of weeks ago. And then after receiving this topic, I started considering how I developed my presentation in front of you. And I highlighted the two words from this topic. One is training, the other one is employability. I mean, start from employability. When I start thinking about the employability, at one point is coming to me myself, which are the competence or cost. I mean, the competence of the seafarers or cost of the seafarer, which is more important, which is more effect to the employability. That is now first come to my mind. Then, first of all, I would like to say that the competence. I'm not going to give you any lecture regarding the math this time, but you see the C equal K plus S times bracket close times A. I used to use this formula during my class at the World Maritime University because this very simple formula will be able to understand the nature of a maritime education training from this very simple formula. You see, the C means the competence, and the K means the knowledge, S is skills, and the A is attitude. And then in addition to this, A equals the FM. That means that the attitude is the function of the motivation. And this formula, I think it will be able to fully understand the nature of a maritime education training. K plus S, that means that these two items are mainly given by the MET institution. Teacher provided the theoretical knowledge and through the lecture, and by which the student get the knowledge. On the other hand, the trainers, they provide some training and practical training to the student or the cadet, and by which they got the skill. But even now, the MET institution provides the best practical education training and also the theoretical education and the practical training. If the student cannot have a very strong attitude, it's nothing. They'll not be able to get the appropriate competence. So how we can keep the high level of the attitude? As you see, attitude equals the function of motivation. What the motivation? Sometimes the motivation is a good status. Sometimes a very good salary. And sometimes a special privilege, things like that. Who gives this kind of thing? Who gives them the motivation? Teacher can provide the motivation for the student during their classroom. But the other point, that the good reputation of the seafarer, the life of the seafarer, because they got the better salary and the status as a seafarer in their country is very high, this also supports the motivation, to increase the motivation all the time. And in such a situation, who can develop the motivation? It's not MET instructor. This is mainly, supported by the government. To introduce a new tax exemption only for the seafarer, this also get provided another motivation for the student. And then also that the good salary that provided by the shipping industry is a very important thing. What I wanted to say is to keep the high level of competence, that means that we need to develop the teamwork, not only the MET institution, but also for with the maritime administration or the government and the shipping industry. We should establish a good teamwork for improving the motivation of the young staff, by which they can get at a high level of attitude, and then after that, they learn competence. The other view of the competence is, that the SCCW, the standard of competence written in the SCCW, as all of you already know, the standard of competence is given in the Code A of SCCW. You know everything about that, which is the mandatory requirements. But the standard of education and training is not given in the SCCW. Instead, the SCCW clearly mentioned that the parties shall ensure that all training, assessment of the competence, etc., are continually monitored through the quality standard system to ensure achievement of the defined object. Who defined the object? It's up to the party. So that's why it's very difficult to prepare the standard education training. So that means that the SCCW did not mention anything about the standard education training. As you know, to develop your quality standard system, the key element of the SCCW are the quality and the accountability, which are achieved by the introducing a proper quality standard system and also the independent evaluation. These are the requirements regarding the competence, standard of competence in SCCW. The other point I mentioned, I highlighted as a cost. Especially the mining cost shown here. You see this, this figure is very old one. I took this one from the textbook I used to use in 1997. And you know that the mining cost is a part of the ship operational cost. And in this figure, it said that the 32% of the operation cost is shown in the figure of 1997. And then the calendar newspaper, the Loyalist, mentioned in the February 2021, it said the mining cost, which represent 50% of total OPEX, lies over 6%, 6%, the largest increase of for 12 years. Those are the information I collected, but I'm not going to discuss regarding a mining cost in detail because I'm not the expert of the economists and so on. My background is the marine engineering. Anyway, instead, I'm going to give you what I experienced when I was young. This is the number of the Japanese seafarers at the historical, the statistical data. I collected from National Statistics Center. The vertical axis shows the Japanese seafarers, both an officer and the ratings, and the horizontal axis shows that the year. They start from 1970 until 2000. As I said, I studied at the Maritime University in Kobe, in Japan, from 1976 until 1980. I graduated after completing all education and then the training on board, and then I got a certificate. Then I worked for the training institution as a seafarer and the instructor for the marine engineering. So my work at sea between the 1980 until the 1987, as she briefly introduced, right? That was the time, as you can see from this bar chart, that time is the most serious time for the Japanese seafarers. I studied at the Maritime University. Our senior student, the 4-year senior and so on, those people can easily get their job at the shipping company. After they graduate, they can automatically join to many of the major Japanese shipping companies. But when I graduated, no shipping company can employ our graduates, especially the engine department. I think that my total number of my classmates in engine department was 80 at that time, and then only just 20% of the students can successfully go to job at sea. The other students have to find out another job. But engineering department is much easier to find out a job at, on shore. So the automation company and then the air conditioning companies really like to employ the marine engineering, and then also the nuclear power stations are also very happy to employ the graduates of Maritime University because we know the plant operation. But anyway, so as you see from this one, you can easily recognize what happened around the 1985. I mean, as you see from this one, drastically, the number of the seafarers reduced at that time, both officer and the rating, especially the rating. What happened? So we try to get to why this happened, and I can show you another one here. This figure shows a number of Japanese flag vessels. Japanese flag vessels at that time need to employ the Japanese seafarers at that time. But you see, the blue parts of this bar chart show the number of the Japanese flag vessels. The orange colors show the number of the foreign flag vessel, of course, including the FOC. As you see, the total number of the ship not drastically changed, but the number of the Japanese flag vessels continued to reduce, and then suddenly reduced after the 1985. That is the main reason why the Japanese seafarers numbers drastically reduced. Right. But what happened? We need to check. What is the trigger of this happen? So I also plotted the line graph, which shows that the exchange rate between the US dollar and Japanese yen. As you see, the shade of the red graph and then the blue bar chart is very similar. And I check the correlation, each other. And then they get the one, you see? No, I think I should not, I should expand this. And then also what happened at the time, as shown here, the Plaza Accord, September 1985, that was a meeting and they get agreement amongst the ministers of finance of the G5 country at that moment. And then they said that to stabilize the exchange rate, especially between the Japanese yen and then the US dollar, all those people agreed to accept that the weaker US dollar. That means the stronger Japanese yen at that time. And then soon after that, the market totally changed. And the exchange rate, as you see from this figure, after the Plaza Accord, the exchange rate between the US dollar drastically changed, you see, from the top to the bottom, right? So this was happened. Okay, then I just calculate the correlation factor in between the number of the Japanese flag vessel and the exchange rate. A correlation factors are equal to 0.993. That means a very strong correlation between these two, right? I don't know exactly what the reason why, but when I checked in detail, the strong Japanese yen caused a higher money cost in US dollar because you know that this is the international business. Even though the seafarer got the Japanese, the salary by Japanese yen, but the accountant just start calculating based on the US dollar. What's going to happen after such kind of exchange of the exchange rate? Even though the Japanese seafarers, the salary never changed in Japanese yen, but if just converted into the US dollar, it's automatically increased all the time. So what's going to happen? Their money costs automatically increase at that moment. So that means that the money cost increasing. So at the end of the day, the Japanese flag vessels lost international competitiveness mainly because of the very high level of operational costs. This would happen. Then during that time, the government and the maritime industry seriously consider how we solve it. And they try to start up the joint project to reduce the regular number of the seafarers by introducing the highly automated ship to reduce the crew member, right? To increase the international competitiveness. That was a very, very big national project. What's going to happen? But unfortunately, never achieved. During that time, the oil shipping company recognized, okay, employing the cheaper seafarer, mainly from the Philippines, Indonesia, is much better instead of the building up the highly cost automated vessel. So, even though they try to do it, I mean, almost 15 years later, the project finished. It's gone somewhere. The maritime institution, including my university, at that moment I was at the maritime university, and we tried to get the we try to develop the attractive curriculum for the student, including those who are not going to the seafarers. We changed the curriculum several times to attract the young generation. But unfortunately, just like the industry and the administration, we failed. We couldn't make any achievement at that time. The trend to reduce the Japanese seafarers is something like the big tsunami. No one can stop that kind of trend, right? So that was the situation. From that, my experience, I, as the educator, don't like to say this, but I have to say it seems that the cost is prioritized rather than competence. Even if we provided the good education training and with the attitude, but if it's cost very high, no shipping industry employs those people. That is the fact about that. That is the lesson I learned. Okay? Yep. The other point, the seafarer training. I mentioned that the training. To consider the training part, I'm now highlighted, focus on both environment and intelligence, according to our current situation. The first on the environment, as you know, that the development of the propulsion system on board as a history, first of all, everyone like power, need more power, a big and powerful engine. But after the oil crisis, the point slightly changed to the efficiency, including summer efficiency, and also the better fuel economy. Now the second generation. And the third generation, especially after the 1990s, after someone from America starts saying the environmental issues. Yeah, the environment, the harmful substance, and GHG emissions, CO2, etc. Right. And this is the development of the propulsion system. First of all, power, efficiency, and finally, it's coming to the environment. NOx and the SOx, and also the CO2 on fuel economy. First of all, to reduce the NOx and the SOx is not a good way to reduce the fuel economy. Yep. I mean, having an NOx, having the shorter NOx, or to reduce the NOx, we have to reduce the peak temperature or the one cyclic process, by which the summer efficiency go down. Yeah, and then at the same time, if you try to reduce the content of the sulfur in the fuel, we need to add some other money to reduce this one. So both of them is a negative direction. So that means that the dilemma about the reduction of the NOx and the SOx. But after that, to reduce the CO2, that means that to reduce the CO2 means exactly the same direction to reduce the fuel consumption. That means that everyone start feeling happy. And also the introduction of alternative fuels for ship propulsion is one new issue. Biofuel and the ethanol, hydrogen, and the ammonia, which is slightly dangerous for the human being. But anyway, I think this is a new point we are going to discuss about that. And the measure to reduce the GHG emissions, the technical measure, EEDI, and you know this one, how design, air lubrication, etc., alternative fuel for the propulsion system, waste heat recovery system, which is the technical measures, and then the operational measures shown there, and then the market-based the measures newly introduced in the discussion. The next point, intelligence. Innovation to develop the artificial the intelligence, the cost for the storage capacity and the processing speed of data, everything is now reducing. So it's easy to get the big data system. Cost of the Internet of Things sensor has also become very cheap, so the data correction is easy. Sometimes we don't need to use any cable between the processing system and the sensor. Rule-based neural network and deep learning, AI also developing through this way. So thanks to this one, MSS, as an application of AI for ship operation, we are in this age now. Significant safety benefit and the lower operational cost because we don't need to consider too much seafarer on board. Easy adoption of the slow speed. This gave us the fuel economy. Like that. And then we see the number of the seafarers on board. The history said the number of the seafarers always reducing, thanks to the technical development. First of all, from a sailing ship to the steam engine, successfully reduce the crew number, and from a coal to oil, and then we can successfully reduce the crew member, and then steam to diesel, and the automation, and the autonomous will reduce much more seafarers for the near future. I think the technical development also support to reduce the seafarers. Why? Because of the mining cost. Right. And in such a situation, we need to consider what the future seafarers, from 2 points of view, as I mentioned, environment. Yeah, 3 measures for GHG emissions. 1, technical measure asks seafarers to understand the sophisticated machinery system equipped to reduce the GHG emission. Seafarers have to be smarter than before. Operational measures ask the seafarer to operate a ship to reduce the GHG emission in accordance with the SAIMI. Also, they need to smart. The market-based measures intensified those requests to seafarers as it is directly related to incentive. Maybe the shipping industry that push the seafarer to understand this kind of thing. Intelligence. The number of the seafarers on board ship will be continuously reduced due to the introduction of the highly automated ships. Consequently, the heavier responsibility is coming to the shoulder of the seafarers, as you can easily imagine. Main task of the seafarers will shift from watchkeeping to problem solving, as the most of the condition monitoring and decision making are made by AI. The only when the seafarers are needed maybe at the time of the incident and or the accident. From this point of view, regarding the future seafarers, I'd like to say the future seafarer will be a sinker all the time, consider like that. Yeah, and then how I solved this problem all the time. So those people are needed. Based on this one, the outlook for the future MET from my point of view is the MET to calculate the sinker on board and shore, and who can apply the fundamental knowledge and skill to obtain the new solution. Number two, the education for problem solver rather than the watchkeeper by introduce a higher level of the learning outcome into the subject. For training of a problem solver on board and shore, right, the simulator training should be focused on as it can easily repeat the emergency situation, repeatable training. Online lectures assessment will be more popular in MET thanks to the COVID-19. Many of the MET institutions already introduced this online lecture and the learning management system. Substantial supply of the qualified MET staff, that is another important issue. To train the thinker, the teacher should also be a thinker. Otherwise, we cannot train the good seafarer. Yep. But at the same time, item to concern here, right? The future technological development to introduce a new and the sophisticated and the complicated machinery system to reduce GHG emission. This will continue. New competence may be needed to safe, efficient, and environmental friendly operation at ship with such a system. And also the discussion at the IMO meeting is also the one of the items I am very much concerned, because the administrator participating in the IMO meeting keeps submitting the proposal for new competencies and the guideline without reducing the requirement. So all teacher and the academic staff, the Maritime University and the training center have limitation, but they don't consider anything about the limitation. This is one of the concerns in my mind all the time. No discussion, as I said, no discussion reduce the competence required even if the reliability of the sophisticated system are high enough. Number of the competences they require the mandatory for the simple increase function, probably exponentially increase for the future. I'm very much worried about this. How do we sustain that the MET? This is also my comment, my own comment, and the efficient maritime education training. To reduce the contact, that means the lecture or the training time, by introducing technology or the education and training, such as the e-learning and the education and the simulator and food training. Assessment may be also may included in the total learning management system. And also to reduce the number of the subject, if there are any overlapping content in some subject, according to my experience, there are so many overlap area of the study, each subject, small subject. One time provided the professor in the marine diesel engine, the other professor providing the plant operation, some part of the lectures fully overlap. In that case, we can easily reduce the total contact time, things like that. Why? And then the MET instructors, assessors should also observe the discussion of the comprehensive review with the SCCR, because the administrator also like to increase the new competence and guideline all the time. Also be great thinker at the Maritime Institution. And my association, the International Association, enjoyed our NGO in consultative status with IMO. So that I think that the IMU's big task is just to below there. Observe the discussion of the comprehensive review of SCCW and also be I mean, that we try to train the great thinker at the Maritime Institution. Those are my presentation. I believe that it's within the 30 minutes. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Malik Bozanjani. This reminds me of graduation ceremonies, where you stand on the podium and you can't see anything because you're blinded by the floodlights. Good afternoon and very warm welcome to all of you. A little bit about me, just less than a minute, so that you would see the background that I come from. I am also a seafarer. Like Teresa, as a deck officer, I went to sea for many years, and then I entered the higher education scene. I worked at Exeter University in the UK, at Solent University, University of Portsmouth, and then I moved to WMU, where I met this young man, handsome person sitting next to me here. We were both professors of maritime education and training. And then I moved from there to Australia, and then Malaysia, set up two universities, then here as the CEO of SAIMI. And then I was in Kenya, in Mombasa for about a year, working with the administration there, reviving the Bandari Maritime Academy that I believe is going very strong now. I would like to invite the panelists to come up to the stage. I can see one of them is sitting here. Could you please come up? I want all of you to come and sit on the stage. For those of you who were not present in our discussions over the last 2 days, on Tuesday we had presentations by the International Association of Maritime Universities about the plans that they have in terms of working with SAIMI and other stakeholders and maritime education providers in South Africa. And that was really good. There is a good plan in place. The timeline is very tight because some of these programs need to be delivered over the financial year of IMU. Yesterday, we looked at the outcome of a research study which was looking at development and improvement, enhancement of the seafarer development program, which runs at SAIMI. My only observations, I mean, Teresa covered some of the things I wanted to say. Takeshi covered more of the stuff that I wanted to cover. But just some observation that I can make, having been away for about 4 or 5 years, that the sector has become much stronger. I can see there is a much closer relationship and cooperation between the higher education providers and SAMHSA. And you heard the DG speak today, giving his words that there would be continued support for SAIMI. More TVETs are getting involved with maritime education training, which is good. I was hoping that Teresa would tell us about Transnet, which is a massive empire, educational empire that they have, very successful. What we were missing yesterday, and I'm very pleased that they are present today, was more participation from the industry. We are very lucky. We have support for this particular conference from AMSL, who have been a supporter of SAIMI since we started work in 2014-15. Now the industry developments, this is not South Africa, this is looking outside. Takeshi mentioned the alternative fuels coming in, the automation, digitalization. My concern is that those are actually being implemented now as we speak, but the SCCW code and the convention does not include any training. So there are high risk areas that we need to attend to fairly urgently. These are things that cannot wait for the comprehensive revision of the convention that Takeshi mentioned. Globally, again, Teresa mentioned the shortage of seafarers have become worse. The ICS study is going to come out, the report is going to come out, and you will see that we are in a lot worse situation than we were 5 years ago, which is good for South Africa and Africa, because this shortage means there is more demand. And that was always the problem that we had. Okay, we can increase the supply, but we can't control the demand. But the demand seems to be there within the international market to employ that plans to set up the South African National Shipping Line. We also heard from MCS and SAMTRA, who were present over the past 2 days, that we have come to a position where they have managed to get berths, and we don't have actually enough cadets to fill those berths, which is a good position. It puts pressure on the higher education system because there is a lead time. If you want to have a graduate from Nelson Mandela University in marine engineering, it would take 4 years at least. So it is that lead time which is working against us at the moment. I think there is a mentioned transition from seafarers to come ashore after having served at sea for a while. We heard Professor John Chudley speaking about to upskill and learn other skills that they need to be able to transition and come ashore. And he's going to talk to us tomorrow. I hope you will attend that. Now we have on the panel 4 people. 2 of them, I think, are going to speak. They're looking at 2 of them are going to speak, and very pleased to have Azwi with us. Azwi is Master Mariner. He's the Chief Examiner, works within SAMSA. He's worked within the sector for about 23 years, from cadet all the way up to Chief Examiner, which probably is the highest ranked civil servant within the maritime education training in any country. His responsibility is very high. He is the person who is responsible to ensure that South Africa will remain on the list of approved countries. I don't call it a white list. There is no white or black. There is just a list of countries which have been approved by the Maritime Safety Committee. And I was very pleased to see that South Africa is back on that list, which is fantastic. And he has worked very closely with education providers to make sure that there is that seamless provision and the support that they need from SAMSA is provided. Now, he's told me he's not going to speak. Are you going to speak? Are you going to say a few words? I can put him on the spot and ask him. So he is number one, and we have 2 colleagues from a shipping company from outside South Africa who've shown interest, both in terms of placement of South African cadets as well as employing South African officers, which is fantastic. What I hope they would tell us is what has attracted them to come to South Africa? How can we get other companies like them to come and work with us? Because that is the question for today. How can we access the international market? How can we make our seafarers more competitive and employable within the international market? So there we've got Captain Kumar and Captain Mahajan who are going to talk to us. And finally, a colleague from Kenya, Josephine, here is going to talk to us. She's got MSCs, got master's degrees both from WMU and IMLI, she told me. She's involved in her role with seafarer registration in Kenya as well as the IMSAS audit scheme. She's done a lot of work, coordination and preparation for the IMO member state audit scheme, the IMSAS for Kenya, implementation of IMO and ILO instruments relating to seafarer training, drafting national legislation. Now, this is one of the difficulties. Drafting national legislation is one of the areas that many countries have failed. There is not sufficient expertise. So IMO is providing a particular program for Asia Pacific, and we're hoping that that could come to Africa as well. She has coordinated independent evaluation that Takeshi mentioned, that it probably is the important part. For a country to be able to export the manpower that they have in terms of seafarers, they need to be on the approved list of countries, and that goes based on the independent evaluation. And then they need to go through another agreement, which is under Regulation 110, which is the mutual agreement with other countries in order to accept each other's qualifications as certificates. So at this point, I will invite Professor Azmi to come and say a few words, if he wants. And then we will move on with others, and then there will be time for questions and answers.
Thank you. I do have a presentation of a couple of slides, but I'll prefer to speak from the notes. I think, Prof, you alluded to the ICS study on the shortage of seafarers, also certificated officers. The fact that in 2026 there will be roughly about 90,000 of certificated seafarers. What I heard earlier in the year also was that from a research done by Brewery, was that this year that shortage is at about 50,000. So that shortage means a couple of things. There's a seafarer who has to stay on board the ship a little longer than they've wanted to stay, or what they were promised that they would stay. So their welfare is in question as well.
I know, right? Just in that with
when you look at the study done by Drury, it almost does not mention African seafarers, not once. It either means that they don't know that Africa exists, or they don't know that we train seafarers. I think it's probably the latter. The little information that exists to being at least in relation to South Africa, is often outdated. And I don't want to go into the African maritime strategy that was discussed earlier, but that's also part of my slides. But I think it talks about collaboration amongst African nations to create maritime training institutions, and not just for seafarers, but for all areas. And more specifically, because this topic is about seafarers, there is a need for us to cooperate to make sure that Africa also reaps the reward of, at a personal individual levels, of having African seafarers work on ships both locally and internationally. If you just look at the registration of ships, Liberia's got one of the biggest flags. But where do those seafarers come from? Certainly not many of them come from Africa. From an administration's point of view, more especially around seafarer training, I only know of about 3 recognition agreements of certificates between African states. That has to be normal. South Africa's got 29 of those, and only 2 are with African states. Ghana's got about more than 30, but also, again, very much not focused in Africa. I think that the African seafarer has to be the front and center of the African maritime policy. I think it's possibly one of the lowest hanging fruits in order to train people. We have infrastructure, maybe we don't have the infrastructure like India and Philippines, where they can train the number of South African certificated officers in South Africa in 1 year. But even with those countries having that capacity, we still have 50,000 shortage. And we only take 10% of, we can only provide 10%, and that still results in the shortage. So when we talk ship registration, when we talk trade policies, whether it's about the cargo owners or the carriers, when we talk about education investments and regional cooperations, they have to benefit African seafarers. If they don't benefit, it's only investors that are benefiting, and we know about capital flight out of Africa. I think defining and accepting that seafaring is a critical and scarce skill in Africa will be amongst the first strategic steps that we need to take so that we can invest a little bit more in the education and training of African seafarers. I think what perhaps we need to convey more to our political principles with regards to investment on the seafarer, on the training of seafarers, is the fact that it's foreign income in dollars or pounds, depending on who you work for, or euros. And that's money that we can use. For most of us, the multiplier effect of one person getting a job in the villages where we come from is massive. It has economic benefits that goes beyond that seafarer. So if we can get a few more seafarers, South Africa's got 5,500 certificated seafarers. That's just not enough. We can benefit a lot.
Sorry?
We also have a very youthful population in Africa. And at least from a South African point of view, about 33%, maybe more, of those are unemployed. There's great opportunities, either for skilled employment or unskilled employment. If you look at cruise liners, they employ people with a variety of skills, as opposed to just officers and ratings who've had some training. And we, between SANSA, SAIMI, the DOT, the Department of Higher Education, and other involved parties, and this goes not just in South Africa, but outside South Africa as well. There has to be a bigger mission to say there is an African seafarer. Why do you not look at them as a solution for employment? And that is the strategic question that we need to answer. If we answer that question, we address the global shortage of seafarers, but we also make a small dent on the unemployment numbers in South Africa. Thank you.
Asmi, thank you very much for that. We would invite for questions in a minute. Next on is Captain Mahajan. Tankit is an accomplished master mariner with an MBA in oil and gas management from the University of Petroleum and Energy in India. He is among the industry leaders in maritime education and training, and he has done a lot of work after the COVID really started to come down in digital education and training. Closely involved with the maritime administrations in the UK. Spent 10 years at sea working on tankers and 5 years ashore. He's a certified trainer, internal auditor, accident investigator, and he's a mentor for a charity in the UK called the Marine Society, which is very close to my heart. They do a lot of good work as a charity in terms of supporting cadets. He has established ocean-wise specialized maritime education training that offers customized training solutions to the industry. How can I invite you to come and say a few words?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, Professor Patik, for the introduction. Honestly, a lot of things that I was planning to say is already said by Professor Takeshi.
Don't worry, I'm
and
going
there is
to
so a lot of things would be a bit overlapping of what I've already said.
Yes, we will.
Obviously, the focus of the conference is development of the seafarers in the African region, leadership, collaboration. So I'll stick to the focus on maritime education and training, and especially for the seafarer developmental part. As we already said in the previous speeches, that as per the latest report of the International Chamber of Shipping, it shows that there's a shortage of 26,000 certified officers in the industry as of today. Unfortunately, this figure is just going to increase as we go ahead. At the same time, if you look at the actual present scenario in major seafaring supplying countries, whether it is Philippines, India, China, UK, there's a lot of gap in terms of qualified and trained seafarers having difficulty to obtain berths on board for sea time training. So there's a contradictory statement here. We're talking about shortage of 26,000 seafarers, and at the same time having a situation where trained seafarers do not find position to go on board. There's something, definitely an imbalance between the demand and supply that we need to address. We've got a mixture of delegates here, including policy makers, regulators, training centers, universities, ship managers, ship owners. So I think this is a perfect platform where you not just talk about the action plan, but take concrete steps to implement measures in place which would overcome these challenges. One of the things, as we said earlier, if you look at the major seafaring supplying countries in the world, Philippines, Russia, China, India, Indonesia, I understand the focus of this conference is on Africa, not just South Africa in particular. But if you look at the statistics, 3 out of those 5 major countries form part of BRICS, which stands for an association of Brazil, Russia, China, India, and South Africa. So I believe South Africa has definitely got a key role here to collaborate, learning from the partners, collaborating, and trying to eliminate this problem of shortage. As Professor Malik also mentioned earlier, with regards to the geopolitical situation, a lot of things happening in the world, there's no better time for Africa to be leading the change in supplying of the maritime officers and ratings for the industry. One of the things, there's no point in only talking about how we can have better facilities in place, maritime education and training. Obviously, that is very important. But also, what goes hand in hand is advocacy for a career at sea. If you do not have 16, 17, 18-year-olds looking up, taking merchant navy and a seagoing career as an option, how are we going to get more people into the industry? So when we talk about maritime education and training, I think advocacy for a career at sea is also something that we need to think on a very important basis. How do we make the career more attractive for these young people? Yeah, there's so many things in the news, criminalization of seafarers. By law, you're allowed to work on board for 11 months, which is definitely not a small period of time. So how do we make the industry more attractive for the youth to consider this and help tackle the problem of shortage of seafarers? Also, important thing is about the career progression, career succession. What opportunities exist after a career at sea? as we said, this is what we address as part of the Coming Ashore program, where I'm associated with the Marine Society. So I think we've got a perfect setup as part of this conference. We got leaders in the true sense in the room, where we need to express ourselves, share good practices, and collaborate so that we create a better future for the industry and help Africa emerge as a ray of light in terms of positioning of seafarers and being a key element in the industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. Madam Josephine, it's your time. I've gone through your bio, I know who you are. You arrived with Ambassador Nancy. Can we have the presentation?
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I'm grateful for this opportunity to stand before you. Sorry, I'm a bit short than podium. Maybe I'll have to move to this side. Yeah, I think you can hear me. Yeah, I'll be discussing on the strengthening of seafarer training for the global opportunities. My colleagues who have gone before me, Professor Nakazawa, Madam Teresa, have spoken much more about what I'm going to be speaking about. So I'll be very brief. I will not go through each and every slide. And the outline is really simple from the legal framework and administrative arrangements and quality standards, which I will not belabor on so much because Professor Nakazawa has spoken quite a lot about it. Technology and digitization, emerging and global development, youth and gender debates, innovation and diversification and collaboration synergies, and what we take home from this conference. Ideally, this is all with the purpose of strengthening MET or seafarer training for the global environment. So legal framework, I'm sure all of us are aware of the international instruments that guide seafarers. And in Kenya, we have ratified most of the international conventions that guide MET from STCW Convention 1978 as amended. We recently, in 2022, ratified the STCWF. In the morning, one of the participants felt like the fishing vessel operators and workers are being left behind. So in Kenya, we have put also the fishers' folk on the forefront, that we have them included. Then we also ratified the Maritime Labour Convention, the ILO Seafarer Identity and Document 2003. I'll tell you why as we progress. And then the ILO Working Fishing Convention. Again, this is the equivalent of Maritime Labour Convention for the fisher folk. And we have also transposed the amendments that come with the STCW Convention. That is amendments of 2014, 15, and 16. And those who do not use the conventions on a daily basis, it's on the Polar Code, the IGF board, which Professor Nakazawa has spoken a bit about, a high voltage and a combination of passenger ships and ro-ro. So on the administrative arrangements, I will also not go into all the details, but as to ensure that we train seafarers for the global market, we need to have a strategic direction for our maritime administrations, as well as the training institutions, to ensure that the seafarers that we are training or the programs that we are running are aligned to their employment or to absorption of our students in the industry. Then this should be coupled by policies. If we have the legal framework without the policies and procedures and guidelines, then how are we going to implement this legal framework? So for it to be practical, we also need to have policies and procedures. Then what most of the times you lack, especially where we come from, or maybe where I come from, maybe this doesn't happen in South Africa and other African countries, you find the prudent management of the resource we have. For example, you may have an institution that has a simulator here, and 2 kilometers down the road there is another one, or even a town away. But you find that this institution wants to purchase a new simulator for the same. Maybe it is a navigational simulator or even an engine room simulator. But instead of harnessing the synergies between the institutions, we start looking for more finances to buy new equipment. And this again follows the knowledge management, the same. When you look at knowledge management, I may not be a seafarer by background, but we have seafarers who we are working with. So how can we share the knowledge? How can we create a synergy as well in knowledge management? How are we transferring this knowledge management, knowledge that we have to the ones who are coming after us? And record keeping also in terms of developing our seafarers for the international labor market is an issue, because we find that we do not keep records sometimes, or sometimes we do not feel they are important. So how do you report to the IMO that you have this number of seafarers, or you have transported these international conventions to the national law? So, and you see there is a reporting requirement, which could either be to the SG or to the IMO GC. And this will come very clear when there is an audit for your maritime administration, and the auditor comes and there is really no record of what that was done, and maybe you already did that what you're supposed to do. But if there were no record kept, or there was no report submitted to the IMO, then that becomes a non-conformity. All right. Moving on, the quality standard is very important for us to be able to export our seafarers, because actually, as you all know, shipping is very international. I will not repeat much more on the quality management systems, the quality standard system, and above all, the code of qualification. If we have ratified certain conventions and amendments in our training institutions, we need also to develop code of qualifications and update, capture what we've already amended, or the conventions that we've taken on board. Then procedures for approval of the training courses have put in place, and conducting of the assessments as well. And also our instructors and assessors, how do we approve them? So Africa, we need to work together to learn from each other how we do this. Because most of the time we find that we have done all these things, but we are doing this in silence. We need to create synergy. Other things that we do suffer from, or we do not have as Africa, most of the time we say we do not have resources for laboratories or workshops that are required for seafarers to be able to see their COC examination. And again, when we want to buy simulators, sometimes we buy simulators for the wrong reason. So we need to speak to each other, learn from each other. When you're buying a simulator, let it have the realism that is required, because again, it is supposed to create the situation at sea, but it shows so that the seafarer or the cadet can be trained what they are going to be expecting at sea at home. And then I've already spoken about communication of information. When you have exemptions or dispensations, it is very critical that we communicate to the IMO so that this can be communicated to the IMO community, that the member states. On recognition of certificates, I think this is a challenge that we brought to ourselves today. We've been looking for recognition of certificates from the developed shipping countries. But as Africa today, how many African countries have recognized each other's certificates? Well, we do not have large fleets, but we need to start from where we are, because charity again begins at home. Technology and digitization is another issue that affects the development of our international seafarer. And we can see that since 2020, a lot of changes are coming, including e-navigation and manned ships, and even the mask that Professor Nakazawa was speaking about this afternoon. So we need to work on the reskilling, development of those programs, having them approved, and also refreshing and updating those seafarers who already have been trained with the other types of ships. Moving on the global development, Professor again spoke quite a lot about this, the decarbonation. Our current seafarer needs to be in tandem with the SAIMI, which are energy efficiency operation of ships. In 2012, when Professor Nakaza was teaching me about EDI, I thought it was a pipe dream. I did not realize in a few years to come that this will be a reality, that ships will be required to embrace decarbonization. So when we were learning, we were like, oh, it is never going to happen. Mass ships are never going to come, but they are here with us. In the port of Mombasa, recently we had a ship that did not need to be docked by a captain, and the ship had to dock itself. So we cannot run away from technological disruptions and the digital development. Youth and gender issues are things that we are not going to. Our youth actually form more than 30% of Kenyan population, and most of them are unemployed. So we need to develop our youth, prepare them for the international employability, and also give them the awareness what to expect there. Let us deal with our culture, for example, our female seafarers who actually have a very low percentage out there. We talk to them about bullying and harassment, and we also give them how to deal with situations when they happen on board ship. Last week I had a call from one of the Kenyan seafarers on board a ship that was really quite far away, I will not mention where. And she told me that one of her bosses was harassing her and she really wanted to leave the ship. So I had to have a really candid conversation online, that is on WhatsApp, and she's actually back on board. And also support our young seafarers. On the government side, let us implement policies that are practical on gender-based violence. And recently, we developed joint guidelines for abandonment of seafarers between IMO and ILO. Probably as Africa, we can propose an agenda for joint guidelines on bullying and harassment, for example. And I believe this is an agenda that IMO and ILO can run with, and we can support our young people. And as I conclude, there is innovation and diversification. We have to innovate and diversify on what we are looking at seafaring, and looking at the ILO definition of the seafarer. It has now gone ahead. Now we have also the cruise ship. The hospitality crews are also considered as seafarers. This is one of the innovations that we can run with and also be able to enhance more Africans getting employed as seafarers. Then we also have oil exploration industry, probably who is working on the modules offshore drilling units. And we in Kenya, we do not have trainings for module operators. That is the Hewitt and the Bossy side. But we are lucky we have South Africa. So most of the seafarers who are working on board modules, they come for their training in South Africa. So as Africa, we can actually support each other much more on this aspect. So the rest has actually been spoken much about. So basically, as I conclude, I would say that we need to have, there is a comprehensive review of the STCW Convention and Code that is upcoming. Do we as Africa have proposals for a framework to consolidate for the amendments that are coming? We have something to propose to BIMCO, who have been assigned as a task by the MSC 105. We have something that we want included in the comprehensive review. So that is one of the takeaways I would like us to think about. We also need to support each other on regional competencies. Cabotage. In the morning, the speaker spoke about African cabotage. We can have ships that can take our seafarers on board, and we have simple MOUs as Africa. Secondly, we can recognize each other's COC and make it easy for our seafarers to get work on board as well as sea service. Then on digitization of MET, let us embrace it. Let me not be writing an email to SAMSA to confirm a certificate of a Kenyan seafarer. Can we embrace digitization? I just need to click on my laptop and check if that seafarer has been trained in South Africa, and I just download and say, yes, I can go ahead, this seafarer is okay. So let us embrace online verification of certificates and issuance of certificates. Besides that, also, of course, we need to take care of the cyber crime. And I think the rest has been spoken about. maybe what I conclude with is to say that let us train for the industry. Let us not train what we think we want our countries to have, but let us look what does the industry need so that we can have our young people being able to be employed on the global market. Thank you very much. I submit.
Thank you very much for that. Kumar, would you like to say a few words? You did have a presentation.
Is everything still fine? No. Do I need anything? No one needs anything from me?
Everybody, the other panelists, they have covered everything. So now I would open the floor for questions. Professor Chatney, you've got your hands up.
John Chudley, Rector of MLA College. Just a question really about the attractiveness of the career. The majority of our students who are undertaking an MSc in Sustainable Maritime Operations are seafarers. But when they went to sea, they weren't even thinking of doing an MSc. And it's interesting that at least two of you talked about a career at sea. We shouldn't be talking about a career at sea, we should be talking about a career in shipping. To others. And I think for the young person, we need to show those opportunities, because I think I learned yesterday at the moment it's about 6 to 7 years, maybe 8 years, that someone will stay at sea. So I just think we should be talking about careers in shipping, not a career at sea, but make clear the opportunity that whether they're thinking academically, but they can do a master's later, early 20s, but late 20s, 30, to help advance their career in shipping. I don't know if it's an observation or a question, sorry, Professor Boardwalk, but it's a comment.
Thank you, John. You have your hands up the other side. I can't actually see the audience. You are completely blinded by these floodlights. Somebody needs to have.
It's just a comment. Shamira Daniels, Fishes A. As we don't panic, just a comment, just sitting here, it's very clear that SAMSA does need to differentiate between merchant shipping and fishing, because the requirements are just so different. And because we've never done that differentiation properly, you've got fishers that's potentially being forced to overqualify. And to the previous speaker's comment, there could be a collapse between people's expectation of what it means to be a seafarer on a merchant ship. And I do understand the conversation from SAMSA's side that you potentially could have fishers that want to become merchant seafarers, but then have a bridging course formulated for that. And I promise you it's a handful of people, and I can only speak for South Africa, that would do that bridging course and have 2 lanes, one for STCW and one for STCWF. And then we can properly start engaging on STCWF without the waters being muddied with STCW. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Asmi, do you want to take that? Fishing vessel personnel, mobility of these people.
Yes, I think, thanks for the comment or question. And I think it's a point that the fishing industry and Shamira is most specifically has driven through SAMSA. And we've accepted that you can't talk about crossovers when you don't have proper structures for each unit separately. So the discussions we want to have with the fishing industry around fishing vessel personnel as a group of seafarers is that what does fishing vessel personnel or fishing, um, uh, what does their training look like? Before we even talk about the handful of people who might want to cross over from fishing to merchant vessels and from merchant vessels to fishing, we need to have that structure in place. And I think that's where our focus is. Because the industry has been clear that if you muddy the water, that conversation becomes very important. Because instead of focusing on a specific group of people, you're now trying to think about everything else that needs to come through. So, and I think we've taken that on board in our plans going forward for the training of seafarers and fishing vessels.
Thank you for that, Aswi. So there was a comment from there and a comment by Aswi. A follow-up.
Can I continue? Program Director, can I continue? Thank you very much. I understand you can't see me, but I would like you to see me. My comment is that let me appreciate the panel and also thank you very much for a profound confirmation of the dilemma that we're sitting with as a continent and as a globe. And what is good is that we've been sitting with the issue of the sea time for a while. It's been decades and decades. We've been trying our best. I think we should accept we tried as much as we could as the industry to address or unlock the bottlenecks in the system. But we seem to be hitting the rock. Now we're talking the new century, the new era, which I would concur with the first prof when he was talking about the issue of attractiveness. If you're now talking the current generation, you're not gonna talk the seafaring as in going and sitting in a ship for 11 months. But then how do you align that past life of a seafarer to the current digitization status of our kids? One thing that I have in mind, which is one of the programs that we're considering as the province of KwaZulu-Natal, just to throw it on the table, is to look on how do you entice our youth to the industry. You're not expecting the current youth to go and sit in a ship without access to the world. So how do you link them and grow their interest? The better way is to create a career path. I think one of the speakers spoke to the issue of the career path. You make them, you train them in a form that they will grow interest naturally. You make it a culture for them to go seafaring, but you start growing that from the land side, and then they grow the interest to go in. Because if we're expecting them to take over, we need to prepare them now. You're talking the issue of robotics, you're talking the issue of the programming of the ships. And then how do you take them in there trying to address the issue of the seafaring that we have in now? The other thing that we're considering is to look on the current baseline when it comes to skills development. One other baseline, one of the baselines that we're banking on is the automotive industry, sort of a labor force, and the excessive pool of the artisans that we have in currently as a continent. We've got a lot of kids that graduated from TVET College. You've got a lot of kids that, or the knowledgeable people that were working in the automotive industry that we can simply convert to come into the industry. That is the maritime industry. But then how do you close the gap between the maritime graduate from university who's struggling to get the sea time and the group of people that I'm mentioning now, which is one of the discussions that I think we need to take forward as an industry. The last because there's quite a lot of those pools of information that is available to guide the policy decisions. The question now is how do we get the puzzle to work for the industry? We've been trying to address the issue of skills mismatch where in the industry is saying we're not training for them. We've been trying to change the university curriculum. We've been trying everything that we could. but it's time to accept that we need to change the mind or just go with the paradigm shifts in the current situation that we are in. Thanks.
Right, thank you for that. Does anyone want to respond? Teresa?
Okay, thank you for that. I couldn't see the lady that was coming from, the comments and the questions coming from. Yeah, we are sitting with quite a bit of a challenge. On the one hand, we're not producing enough seafarers. On the other hand, we have unemployed seafarers. Um, what does it mean in the context of the vision of a maritime center for Africa? And I think we also need to start looking at some of these conundrums and challenges and how we can try and solve it within a continental maritime center. Um, because I don't know if regionally or continentally we can consider some kind of database where our unemployed seafarers across Africa is on one database, or a regional database. There are African shipping lines. There are collaborations between some African countries and the north, the east, and the west. But the broader Africa is not benefiting from that. So we really need to start consolidating efforts. We cannot have unplaced seafarers, whether cadets or officers, yet in other countries, and I'm generalizing, I don't want to mention any country in particular, are able to place their people, because that is the situation in Africa. We need to really start collaborating. What are we going to do? We're not producing enough seafarers. We touched on the fact that, yes, there are more and more feeder pools, even coming from TVET, and trying to link that to traditional units within university that offer maritime seafarer training, but it's still not enough. Recognizing certification between countries, between regions, we have to go there. We have to think outside of the box of how to do this. We cannot keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting, different results. So definitely, I think I feel the same concern, but I think we can solve it. We can solve it. We need to get out of our corners, get out of our silos, and just decide to work together for the greater good of employment of our seafarers in the international market. I don't think I've covered everything, but I'm just trying to get us to think beyond.
Thank you. Maybe to add, SAIMI has been, with their partners, have been doing a lot of work to deal with the issue of those qualified or potential seafarers who are struggling to find employment. I would like to think that at least for those who are looking for training berth, we're seeing the back end of cadets who have to wait 18 months at home to get their training berth. And I think also maybe we say, just to put him on the spot, if there is anybody who's looking for training berth, maybe they should contact him. I think his contact, he should be easily contacted. I know it's very easy to get a hold of VBC as well. But I think the one thing that I want to come to as well, maybe that came from the comments that we're talking about, or the question that was raised, the cooperation that needs to happen between African maritime administrations, whether bilateral or multilateral, must be driven with the African Seafarer, so that when we cooperate, it's not about the $1 billion ship, but it's also about the money that the seafarers will earn. And between journalists like myself and Satya, we need to find ways to make it easy. She mentioned technology in her presentation, to make it easy that if a South African seafarer or a South African trained African seafarer needs to go finish studies in Kenya, what is the process? And if they want to get employed there on ships registered there, what is the process? We rely primarily on the process that is set out in the East African Convention, or we want to have intra-African arrangement between administrations and people like that. And I think the collaboration and the synergy that she spoke about, I think for me is an important part, especially when they get involved in managing the resources of the training institutions, which is maybe not the liberty that we've got in South Africa, because we went from a stage where there were about 6 simulators in the country to, I don't know how many there is now. There's a lot. I don't know how much of those simulators are being used, at least 80% of the time that they're used. And if South Africa can train 100 chief engineers a year, unless there's a need for 110, then all the 100 chief engineers that need to come out of Africa then should be coming out of South Africa, if we can put it that way. But I think it's a lot easier to say it, but I think it's something that I will be exchanging notes with Satya, that at least between Kenya and South Africa, there's start a working relationship when it comes to seafarers. Maybe as soon as tomorrow.
Asmi, thank you very much. One thing I can add to what Asmi said is that there is an association of African maritime administrations. And what I encourage SAMSA and Kenya to do at the moment, Nancy is chairing that association, is to add to their agenda these issues which came up today. They met a few months ago, I think it was in Mombasa, we couldn't attend. So this could be resolved. And in terms of employment, Philippines was mentioned. If you look at Philippines, they probably have about 2.5 million seafarers at any one time. Only a small portion of that is employed. The others are waiting for employment. They're waiting for the turn to go on board the ship. When we talk about Filipino seafarers, it doesn't mean that they're all at sea serving. That is all I had to add. I think there are a few other hands up. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Obri Sosibo from Lohim Maritime Center. I do have 2 questions and perhaps a comment. But Ms. Williams, I would love to open with this thing. When I was doing my first year S1 at CPUT, I remember in the middle of the semester when Captain Gus was lecturing us sea transport at that time, had a session on bunkers, and we also did some long calculations on how much bunkers a ship will need and how much it will all cost. Then at the end of the lesson, a classmate who looked confused, and the captain asked him, "Young man, do you understand or do you know what are bunkers?" And then he said, "Yes, sir." So he asked, "So tell me, what are bunkers?" And he said, "Beds." So we were thinking, now all this time, after all the calculations in the whole lesson, this guy was thinking about a bed. So with that being said, as the country, can we say we are confident with the quality of seafarers we are actually producing? I know that this is an international industry and it is very competitive at this point. So are we able as a country to produce seafarers that will not only have the right content, but will also be able to articulate themselves properly and especially going for interviews and the like. And then secondly, I think it is very clear
Sorry,
seeing
can I stop you? Would you like somebody to answer that before you go to the second question?
I'll just wrap up so we answer all at once. So it is very clear talking about maritime education and training. And I think Mr. Nakazama, if I'm not mistaken, spoke about the new demands that the industry needs in terms of maritime education and training. We need thinkers, problem solvers, there is technology, you name it. Now, Mr. Nduli spoke about policy and how every sector that is not properly, what's the English word, without proper policy, will actually not be able to progress. And high school maritime education is something that South Africa has been the pioneers of. It's been 27 years where South Africa is actually offering a maritime subject at a high school level. But to date, there is not much focus on high school or secondary school maritime education. Can that be a sector of interest in terms of actually growing and strengthening maritime education and training? I mean, at the current moment, Kenya is one of the countries that have seen what we do in South Africa, and they've reached out and say, we want to have maritime education as early as from grade 7. Namibia is another country that has reached out. So unfortunately, or actually fortunately, from the continent, there is interest. But I'm afraid here at home, there is less emphasis on maritime education and training at a high school level. Is that an area that we as the country can explore to strengthen our maritime education and training? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the questions and comment. Any volunteers to take those on? As
Thank you very much for that comment or question. I will start with the first concern that you have about Gqeberha's competency. And you gave a good example of the fact that the East Now, I am confident if our training institutions in Africa implement the approved courses, which ideally are guided by the approved model courses issued by IMO, and which are implementing the international standard of training procedures, the STCW convention. And they have gone through the course and the approved sea service. I do not have any doubt that the Africans are employable, ready, and competent enough to serve on the international ship. Probably that was an isolated case. The other issue is that you are worried about the seafarers being able to pass the interviews. For us in Kenya, we have a similar challenge whereby you find seafarers have gone for an interview, and after COVID-19, most of the interviews are virtual before they do other physical interviews. So what we are doing currently is to ensure that there is engagement with the seafarers who are preparing for the interview, and you do a pre-interview motivational mentoring. Take them through, let them understand what is the expectation of the shipping industry, so that by the time they sit in for the actual interview, they have a clue what is expected of them. Maybe I will leave my fellow panelists to proceed with the rest of the question. Thank you.
yeah, thank you for that. I was just told that the dinner tonight, gala dinner, is at 6, so we don't really have that much time to go on. There is a, Asmi, you wanted to respond to the president?
No, I wanted to respond to the question, but I think Tia has taken about activism, what I wanted to say. I think I wanted to say all of that. And maybe if finish with saying I would want to know from the ship operator if what we think we're doing is really because I have the same level of confidence. But I think maybe as a ship operator, what do you see from where you are sitting?
Thank you very much. I think
Thanks. I actually had asked for the mic so I could say this even before you said that. My name's Andrew Millard from Gqeberha. We have a pool of South African seafarers built up over 8 years to trade on we have not had problems with South African seafarers. I'm quite shocked about someone not knowing. That speaks to me more about who trained them, not their caliber. We have had, as every carrier would have had, we've had systems. Only once when we were South Africa, we've only ever had one South African sent down by a pilot. And that's one other thing. We find that the South African seafarers have a great work ethic, that they deal very well with conditions at sea. They far less think that the Filipinos want to shorten their contract. They have above normal level of command of the English language, ability to communicate understandably in an accented way. They have, I think, short, South African seafarers are excellent seafarers relative to any other, in fact, relative to any other countries, the seafarers are weak. They get on with it, they have a fantastic work ethic, as I said, they're able to stay motivated in difficult environments. We've done a lot of work on this, and we are very proud of South African seafarers, and we are surprised at the higher level of interest that we see.
Thank you very much for that. Howard has been waiting at the back there. I think you had a question, Howard. No, he's gone. There is. There was only. Let me get it. Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much for that. Just a quick question. Some very good comments and suggestions so far, but I noticed a lot of emphasis on collaboration, coordinating efforts. And my question is, what would be the common platform for doing that? I know you talked about NOSA, which is Maritime discussion. But I think we cannot solve this problem without international industry engagement. And I sort of wonder whether there is a need for a common platform for industry to engage with governments to address these issues, or maybe even come up with a joint plan and work together to implement it. Now, my organization, the Global Maritime Forum, we do have an annual summit every year where senior leaders, CEOs of some of the biggest companies in the world in the maritime industry come together to discuss common issues. Now, they have identified seafarer shortage as one of the top issues facing the industry. And they have decided to focus on helping attract and retain seafarers into the industry. In fact, it was the reason why, one of the reasons why I was employed to help them develop that program. But one thing I can tell you right now is I am not sure which platform to engage with in Africa in order to initiate that conversation, other than going to individual countries or sub-regional organizations. So how can we come together like common umbrella to be able to engage, whether government-to-government engagement or industry-to-government engagement?
Thank you very much. I don't have the answer for that question. I guess SAIMI would be the right party, given their mandate, to work with you. So I suggest George, the CEO of I'm sure he will take it on. There is a question on the screen here. The technology is fairly advanced here. The shortages that we talked about, challenges in particular in higher education institutions, that they are suffering, they're struggling about attracting lecturers, to make sure that the programs they offer are valid and remain valid with SAMHSA. So they're asking, is there any way the government can help support these institutions? I believe, and this is my own belief at the moment, I believe that these set of skill sets are on the scale set of lists that the government has. So it is not going to be impossible to recruit lecturers from overseas. Additionally, SAIMI has got a salary supplement scheme that they provide to universities that they would distribute to qualified lecturers. So, Sani, you have.
Yes, thank you very much. I think this is very enlightening. Mine would just be a comment. Considering the changes that have been expressed since you started 2 days ago, maritime education and training needs to begin preparing for the future now. At the moment, we are still grappling with compliance with the present systems. We know that the future is a digitized future, which will impact on seafarers, it will impact on port workers. The compulsory piloting system that we have at present could change. So it is important that we must not wait for that moment to confront us today, for us to act immediately. So we need to begin planning for that future. So planning for that future means that we need to give ourselves time to step out from the current compliance and maintenance of the present system to plan for the future. The Free African Trade Area Agreement has arrived. It's here now. So unfortunately, we're now grappling as to how to fit into that system. But we knew about it for some time. So in order for us not to, we need to demystify it for maritime education and training by looking for anything that will be intra-African, particularly in seafarer education and training, to implement. Because what is the meaning of intra-African trade in the context of education and training? And how can we then apply that? Because the questions that have been coming here and the need for collaboration, yes, it's been an issue that's been spoken about, but now we are required to promote and deepen intra-African trade. Can we deepen intra-Africa collaboration in education and training? Not next year, but we need to do it now because we need to fit in. So let's not look at intra-African trade as just something that's very far, but it's confronting us now. And what plans are we putting into place? Just one last comment about African Maritime Association. As it exists today, it's still interim for one reason. It is dependent on the revised African Maritime Transport Charter for it to be recognized as a legitimate entity. So it is very urgent that the charter comes into force because that's the only instrument
What do you need, my son?
I need a charger. So that's not short-circuited. It is important for the children.
What have you got there? iPhone?
Then we would
There you go.
recognize AMA as a
There you go.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Do what my girlfriend said. Put it in.
Okay, I think that was very interesting what you said, Lamisani. Sort of made me think. Yes, we need to do things differently. We need to do different things. But given the restrictions, you live, you work at IMO, you were based there, you know the restrictions which are around Samsung in terms of the way they need to operate. I'll be interested to talk to you privately, see how we could do this, because it is interesting. I think we need to do it. We need to start rattling the cage and start doing things. Now, Teresa is going to comment about.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add something with regards to the question that was asked about maritime lecturers and the shortage there. It's important that we link seafaring also to, in terms of an avenue after being at sea, to branch into education, into academia. It's one of those succession paths. But to branch from being at sea into academia is something that needs to happen. It means we need to encourage our seafarers to continue studying, to continue learning. It's not enough just having a certificate of competency and having an expectation that having a COC from class 3 to class 1 makes you an automatic lecturer. It doesn't work like that. One needs to continue studying from a bachelor's degree to a master's degree and ultimately to a PhD. Because the COC does not prepare one to understand research or to be able to do research. So that's important. That's why there is a shortage of lecturers. We need to create that path. And it's a message that needs to go out to our seafarers to study while they're on board, to use their time when they're on leave, to enroll for university programs. There's a lot of distance learning programs internationally that seafarers can study, and to really tap into that, to prepare themselves for opportunities on land and not assume a COC is sufficient.
Right, thank you very much. This is the last question that we would take. There is a hand up there. He needs a microphone.
Good afternoon. I'll not waste time. I just want to mention the last good message from Ms. Teresa. I like that he talked about advancing our studies as a seafarer. I am a seafarer. I work with Boardwalk, which is an international company, and recently there have been many guys that was employed by all the different South Africans, which is great. The challenge with us furthering our studies is that, of course, we are at sea. We do want to further our studies, but then the education system in South Africa does not support us. You find that the advanced courses that they enrolled, especially in some institutes, they already have advanced courses, but then some of them, mostly the basic attendance to final exam events. There came a time after COVID when they enrolled online learning. I was able to do my advanced diploma, advanced diploma DUT. I did that. And last year, I pursued, while I was on board, I did this too. I pursued a postgraduate diploma in international shipping. But when it was time to write my final exam, I had issue, because I was on board a ship, I had issue with making them understand that I cannot attend actually took the matter by his hand. We do want to learn, but then we also need to support our families, right? Which means we need to quickly say, with different international education institute offering advanced studies. Okay, academic requirements may be hard because some of them is that you already have master, chief mate license or master's license. But we are junior officers and we like learning. We just want to continue learning, and there's advanced courses, and these advanced courses are for us. So give us access to these advanced courses. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. John, you want to respond? Or?
We have approximately 1,000 students, and I already said the majority of those are seafarers who are studying while at sea, doing bachelor's sustainable maritime operations and master's sustainable maritime operations, specifically designed for seafarers. So, yeah, that's it. Okay.
Yes, so I think this was a message for Tibet and higher education providers in Africa, that they need to be more flexible and take care of the people who are at sea. We are moving into an era where education is going to be provided and available when they need it. Seafarers, when they come ashore, they want to go see their families, they want to go on holiday with their children. But education, things like what Takeshi mentioned, the safety-related issues, could be delivered at sea in small ice that they can take on. Ladies and gentlemen, I think at this point we will close this session. I would like you to join me